we want to watch this Buddha video. We will watch this. This is not the Buddha. Yet.
This rotund fellow is not the Buddha. Or at least not yet. More on that in a minute. But honestly, I don't blame you for...
Yeah, you'll see a lot of these quote-unquote fat Buddhas that are there. I mean, technically the Buddha wasn't really fat, but he wasn't particularly skinny either. The most basic teaching of Buddhism is the concept of the middle way, which is where you do not lean into extremes. Like, the story of the Buddha is that he was born into a rich family whose parents had a dream that he would one day leave the palace and become an influential figure, and they wanted to coddle him and kept him there, but he stayed in the palace for a lot of his life, but when he took one trip outside the palace, he saw a lot of pain and suffering around, and he was very distraught by the fact that such a world could even exist. So he temporarily became an ascetic, like, subsisting off of very little, to the point to where he got very, exhausted. And it was in that moment that he realized that the life of extreme luxury and the life of extreme austerity are lives that were not worth living, and that only a balance between these two was a good way to live, and that is the basis of the middle way. Of course, there are other teachings in Buddhism, like the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, and then there are aspects of Buddhism that make it fundamentally different from Hinduism, among other things.
For thinking he is the Buddha. That's a common misconception. This is actually Budai, a possibly historical Chinese monk believed to have lived around the 10th century CE. But as I was sourcing footage and images for this video, the search query Budai was almost useless on these websites. I always needed to type in laughing Buddha or fat Buddha to find results. But even if Budai is not the Buddha, he's still a fascinating figure in Buddhism, weaving together religious prophecy, folk devotion, and the eccentricities of Zen Buddhism. So if he's not the Buddha, who is Budai, and what does he represent? Now, we don't exactly know if Budai was a real person. As far as historians can tell,
we don't know if a lot of religious figures are real people. I mean, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that they are, just based on various accounts and stuff, but there's a video that I watched regarding the historicity of Jesus that goes really, really in depth to all of the sources, both Roman and Jewish, and anything that wasn't Roman or Jewish, that all correlate to Jesus being a real person.
He may have been a Chan monk who lived sometime in the 9th or early 10th century CE, during the twilight years of the Tang dynasty. As we talk about in another video, Chan Buddhism is better known as Zen Buddhism, and it's a lineage of Mahayana Buddhism that emerged in China that emphasizes direct insight of one's Buddha nature.
Yeah. Here in the West, people have commercialized the concept of Zen. The art of Zen this, the art of Zen that. I remember in the episode of Rugrats where they go into the bowling alley, Drew had a book called The Art of Zen Bowling. So, obviously, here in the West, a lot of people will hear the term Zen and think, yeah, peace of mind, this and that and that and this, but they don't even know what it actually means or where it actually comes from. They just hear about it from some bookstore or, God forbid, TikTok.
Or the inherent capacity to become a Buddha. And let me tell you, Chan Buddhism has its fair share of eccentric personalities. His name Budai is actually a nickname, meaning cloth sack, which tells you something about his vibe. He starts appearing in early Song dynasty sources, such as the Song biographies of eminent monks dating to 988 CE, or the Chan compendium known as the Record of the Transmission of the Lamp, dating to 1004 CE, both of which describe Budai as an eccentric monk named Chitsa. The transmission of the lamp describes him as rather plump, with a wrinkled forehead and big belly. The words that came out were not coherent. He would lie down to sleep just where he happened to be, carried a cloth bag on the end of his staff in which he hoarded all bits and pieces offered to him.
Oh, like a knapsack, yeah. The words that came out were not coherent. That tends to describe a lot of figures of this nature, where they'll have like these ecstatic spiritual experiences, sometimes brought on by hallucinogens, and other times brought out by just deep meditation, where sometimes they might be like speaking in tongues and stuff.
People of the time called him Big Bag Boy or Master Cloth Bag. So these early sources portray him as a free spirit figure in the Chan community, living as a vagabond, sleeping wherever he wants, and carrying his few possessions in his very large bag. And he was also a wonder worker, a master fortune teller who could predict the weather. The transmission of the lamp says sometimes he would sell things from his sack and they would ask him to tell their fortunes, which invariably came true. Budai's hagiographies are peppered with other miraculous episodes. In one story, a layman bathing alongside him sees a third eye on Budai's back. The man tries to touch the eye and asks if he's a Buddha, but Budai quickly cuts him off and urges him not to tell anyone. Another time when asked his age, Budai replies that his cloth bag was as old as the empty sky. These stories signal that Budai was not an ordinary monk, and maybe not an ordinary human either, which we'll get into shortly. He was considered a Chan master, a deeply awakened individual with profound wisdom to share. He's described teaching the Dharma through cryptic gestures. In one story, a fellow monk asks him, "What is the essence of the Dharma?" And Budai just silently drops his bag. When asked, then how do you practice it? He picks the bag back up and walks away. That's classic Chan Buddhism. Chan masters often taught using koans, paradoxical statements or dialogues meant to short-circuit logical thinking and jolt students into a moment of insight. This here is kind of like a koan in action, cryptic behavior that you need to decipher and meditate on. His favorite teaching tool apparently was...
Yeah, you'll find stuff like that a lot in these different contexts. You ask a question, but then you get an answer that's not as straightforward as it seems. So you get really confused by the answer. It's like answering a question with another question. You're like, yeah, but you didn't actually answer my question. Oh, did I? Or it's like that one scene in King of the Hill where, in the episode where Bobby was thought to be the reincarnation of a llama. One of the monks was arguing with Hank, where Hank is all like, "You tell my boy that he's not a llama." And then the monk says, "It is not up to me. There is a Buddhist saying, as the ox pulls the cart," or something like that. "The wind cannot overturn a mountain." And Hank is all like, "You sound like a song from The Lion King. Stop that. It makes no sense." Doesn't it? Or does it make perfect sense? You see, that's the kind... I'm gonna kick your ass! If my ass is to be kicked, then it'll be kicked.
Being mildly annoying to people. In the 13th century text Jipan's account of the history of Buddhism, the text describes a time when a monk asked Budai what he was doing by the roadside. Budai replied, "I'm waiting for someone to come." The monk said, "Well, here I am." Budai then randomly pulled an orange from his robe and offered it to him. But just as the monk reached out, Budai snatched it back and said, "You're not the one." Okay, what does that
mean? The biggest troll that you've ever seen. Yeah. That's a pretty troll move. Yeah, you'd be surprised by how often that might happen.
Well, that's for you to figure out. Or another time, a monk asked him a common Chan koan. How would this have been the intention of the patriarch master when he came from the West? A reference to Bodhidharma, the Indian monk who, according to tradition, brought Chan Buddhism to China. The question is meant to probe whether someone's current actions or understanding truly reflect the essence of Bodhidharma's teachings. Like in that previous story, Budai just dropped his bag and stood quietly. When the monk then pressed for a deeper answer, Budai picked up his bag and walked away. And as the monk himself walked away, suddenly Budai tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Give me a coin." And my personal favorite, one time Budai scrawled a note on a public bathroom. "I have been begging for alms and just arrived. You may not urinate or defecate here." Basically, you're not allowed to use the public bathroom because I'm here asking for alms. These sources describe him as what you might call a holy fool, the kind of person who seems ridiculous at first, but who might actually be awakened underneath all that eccentricity.
Yes, the sacred troll. The sacred troll that you would least expect. Someone that you might think is too much of a trickster to really be considered holy. But when you really stop to think about it, it makes more sense than anything else in all of existence. And we have a statue of Yoda here.
Kind of like Yoda pretending to be a goofy Muppet when Luke first meets him in The Empire Strikes Back, when he's really a Jedi Master behind all that silliness. So by worldly standards, Budai seems to be a vagrant eccentric, but in the Chan Buddhist perspective, he manifests the ease and bliss of awakening in his own quirky yet profound way. So from these early Song Dynasty sources, Budai emerges as a Chan monk whose eccentric antics made him a local folk hero, who was quickly elevated in popular imagination to something more. We can't be sure, but historians think it's at least possible he was a historical figure, but the sources we have are hagiographical. That is, they read more like saintly legends than sober biographies. They're filled with miracle stories, cryptic teachings, and larger-than-life episodes that make it hard to separate fact from devotional fiction.
That basically happens a lot with religion and mythology. Like, you'll find that a lot of them are based on historical events, but they tend to have a lot of like supernatural elements to them. The Trojan War is a very good example of this, like in the Iliad and the Odyssey. Like, we know that the Trojan War pretty much happened. There's plenty of evidence. We know where Troy is or was. And we have records from the Hittites that describe a lot of the events and places that are mentioned within the Iliad and the Odyssey. Now, there are some scholars that still deny that it existed, just even though there's plenty of evidence that it happened. But within the Iliad and the Odyssey, there are the mentions of, like, the gods intervening within the war and doing all sorts of intervention, basically. Apparently, according to the books, the Trojan War started over a beauty contest. Now, I don't actually remember how it started. That's just off the top of my head. Like, a bunch of the goddesses got together and they were having a beauty contest, and apparently Aphrodite got jealous that she wasn't the winner, even though she's the goddess of love and beauty. So that would be considered sacrilegious. Don't quote me on any of that, because I don't actually remember. So don't quote me on any of that. You might have to look that up on your own time. I don't feel like doing it right now. Because I know that Helen of Troy is involved and various others. I don't actually remember, so don't quote me on any of that.
Hence, many scholars call him a semi-legendary monk. Let's turn now to his iconic look. Visual representations of him started to emerge around the same time as these literary accounts, and they spread across China to Japan and Korea, where he became known as Hotei and Podai respectively.
Well, with regards to the origin of, or how it started, the Trojan War, we do have records from the Hittites that mention one of their princesses marrying someone from Greece. There's more to it. There's a lot more to it than that, but I don't really remember it all, so don't quote me on anything I just said. It's probably not quite true. I'll have to look it all up.
One of the earliest depictions of Budai can be found in the rock-cut temple complex Feilifeng, located in Hangzhou, China. Carved during the Song Dynasty in the 1100s or 1200s, this sculpture already captures the key features that would define Budai's iconography for centuries to come. A big sack, a big smile, and a loosened robe displaying his big belly.
I say he's happy because he's enlightened.
His casual posture and overall informal vibe stands in stark contrast with more solemn Buddhist iconography, and people have read all kinds of symbolism to each part of Budai's look. His big belly has been interpreted as representing abundance and prosperity. His bag from which he gets his nickname represents his simple life, free of attachments. Others say it represents the burdens of human desires and suffering that he carries lightly. Still others say it represents his generosity. Some stories say he would pull candy from his bag for children, or whatever the poor would ask for.
Harry's bag of candy for children. What other way could that possibly be interpreted? No other way. Just some guy just has candy, just wants to give it to them, and then move on their merry way. Yeah, watch someone just take that out of context, alright? Now, obviously, he's just giving candy just out of generosity. I highly doubt he's going to Diddy parties.
and his laughing face represents the joy that comes from true awakening. He's often depicted in whimsical scenes in traditional Chinese and Japanese art, laughing or playing with children. In Japan, Hotei surrounded by children became a common art theme in the Edo period, emphasizing him as a being of contentment and domestic well-being. Woodblock prints like this one from the 19th century represent him almost like a grandfatherly figure, smiling as he marches along with happy kids. In these early Song Dynasty sources, we also see the emergence of the defining feature of Budai's veneration in later Buddhism, his identification with Maitreya.
Oh yeah, Maitreya is basically an end times figure within Buddhism. Every religion seems to have some sort of end times figure that would come in and bring peace and prosperity to the world. Here in Buddhism, they have the Maitreya Buddha. In Hinduism, they have the final avatar of Vishnu named Kalki. Judaism has the promised Messiah. Christianity has the second coming. Islam has not only the second coming, but someone known as the Mahdi. And then Jainism has an infinite time cycle where there's a cycle of there's an ascending time cycle and a descending time cycle, where the descending time cycle is the one that we're currently in. And there's 24 Tirthankaras that are supposed to be the primary teachers of Jainism. And the most recent one is Mahavira, who is the 24th and final one of this current time cycle. We're in the descending time cycle, and the ascending time cycle won't happen for another few hundred years or so, where there will be a new set of Tirthankaras, but that's about it. But yeah, most of these religions have some sort of messianic figure, basically. And Maitreya is that of Buddhism.
The future Buddha awaited in Buddhist eschatology, or theology focused on the end of the present age. See, in Buddhism, there's not just one Buddha. There have been many in the past, and more are expected in the future. Siddhartha Gautama, the historical figure most people think of as the Buddha, or Shakyamuni Buddha, is just one in a long line. Maitreya Buddha is believed to be the next Buddha. Right now, though, he's chilling in Tushta, a celestial realm where future Buddhas hang out before their earthly debut. And he's waiting for the exact right moment to descend to Earth, achieve awakening, and teach the Dharma to the world that has forgotten the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha. In medieval China, revolutionary movements rose and fell centered around Maitreya's imminent arrival, often in response to social and political crises, with charismatic leaders claiming to be Maitreya incarnate. At the same time,
like the people today that claim to be Jesus. Like, there are plenty of people today that do believe themselves to be Jesus. So the fact that even within the context of like other religions, there are still people that will claim to be somebody that I might not necessarily be.
Buddhist schools were developing their own Maitreya practices. Some focused on visualization techniques to connect with Maitreya in Tushta, while others emphasized the recitation of Maitreya's name as a form of devotion. So how does Budai factor into any of this? Traditional depictions of Maitreya show him as a princely figure, often wearing a crown and jewelry, the picture of regal serenity. On the other hand, Budai looks like he never met a meal he didn't like and a joke he couldn't laugh at. These two figures couldn't be more different. The future Buddha versus an eccentric vagabond monk. Well, before his death, Budai reportedly chanted a mysterious poem. Maitreya, true Maitreya, manifested in billions of forms. Constantly he reveals himself to men, yet the people of this age do not recognize him. These mysterious lines were interpreted as Budai declaring himself an incarnation of Maitreya, unrecognized by those around him. The song biographies of eminent monks dating to 988 CE quotes a shorter version. Maitreya, Maitreya, people today fail to recognize him. This is the first text to explicitly connect Budai with Maitreya. In effect, Budai's final act was a revealed identity. He was Maitreya in the flesh, a rustic Buddha-to-be who lived among ordinary people. This claim resonated strongly among Song Dynasty Buddhists, and Budai's Maitreya identity gained traction in both monastic and lay
Glad
circles.
you're having fun.
Chan masters invoked it in their teachings. For example, the recorded sayings of the Chan master Dahui notes, "If we bow down to Maitreya Buddha, we can rely on Budai's broad intestine and big belly." In other words, venerating Maitreya is effectively venerating Budai. Sayings like this suggest that within Chan thought, Budai was accepted as an incarnation of Maitreya, illustrating that the future Buddha can be found here and now if you have the insight. We also see this belief in that sculpture of Budai at the Feilafeng Cave Temple. The 18 figures who flank Budai are the 18 Arhats, or Luohans, enlightened disciples of Shakyamuni Buddha according to Chinese Buddhism, who are seen as guardians of the Dharma who remain in the world to protect Buddha's teachings until the coming of Maitreya. The decision to place Budai at the center of this group makes a strong theological point. This was not just an eccentric monk. This was the future Buddha. You just don't recognize it yet. Sent into the world not to rule from on high, but to mingle with the common people. This had an eschatological subtext.
There was this one guy within Jewish history that claimed to be the Messiah, and a lot of Jews within Europe genuinely thought that he was the Messiah, but he ended up converting to another faith, and so the Jews kind of just abandoned him.
Rather than awaiting Maitreya's distant descent from Tushta, Chan masters taught that Maitreya's compassionate presence was already manifest in the world. In typical Chan fashion, the lofty future Buddha was brought down to earth as a laughing monk, a teaching that awakening may appear in unexpected, humble guises. And ordinary lay people outside of monastic circles enthusiastically embraced Budai's Maitreya persona. Records from the Song Dynasty onward describe people painting his image, making offerings, and celebrating him in connection with Maitreya. In effect, Budai became the popular face of Maitreya all over East Asia. In Chinese Buddhist temples, even today, the statue of Maitreya in the front hall is often Budai, rather than the traditional princely form of Maitreya. And over the centuries, Budai blended into the broader fabric of East Asian popular religion. In Chinese popular religion, Budai assumed the role of a folk prosperity deity. Effectively, he became a friendly patron whom anyone, Buddhist or otherwise, could invoke for luck or abundance. It was not unusual for a household shrine or a shop altar in China to feature a Budai statue with incense and offerings, much like how you would honor folk deities like the stove god or fortune god.
Yeah, you'll find these types of practices in many different faiths as well, like when Christians would have like a cross with Jesus on them and they're hanging up on the wall, or a picture of the Virgin Mary holding a baby Jesus and that kind of thing. Although in some cases they could be seen as like idolatry or something, but that is besides the point.
And to this day, you'll see people rubbing or patting his belly for good luck. In Japan, Budai, or Hotei as he's called in Japanese, was integrated into the Shichi Fukujin, or the Seven Lucky Gods. This was a group of deities that emerged around the 15th century and became a central part of Japanese New Year celebrations. Each god represents a particular virtue and promises some form of good fortune. Unsurprisingly, Hotei's specialty is generosity. On New Year's Day, he's said to sail down from the heavens aboard a treasure ship alongside the other lucky gods, and with his magical bag, he hands out treasures and gifts to kids. He's almost like a Buddhist Santa Claus figure, and I'm not just saying that. Some Japanese temples literally dress him up like Santa around Christmas. But Hotei is still a respected figure in Japanese Zen monasteries, so he kinda has a dual life in Japan, both as a folk god in the context of popular religion, and an awakened monk and future Buddha among Zen Buddhists.
It's a little ironic, especially in the case of Japan, considering that they have metabolism laws in Japan where you have to be under a certain weight. And you could be like slightly overweight, and a Japanese person will point at your belly, be like, you like food? Huh? So it's like, I guess it's just one of those things.
And over the last 100 years, Budai's image has traveled far beyond Asia, largely through the Chinese diaspora and international art trade. By the 20th century, small statues of a so-called fat Buddha became common curiosities in Western households and restaurants, symbolizing an exotic charm of prosperity. Paradoxically, Budai became one of the most globally recognized figures associated with Buddhism, while at the same time being widely misidentified as Shakyamuni Buddha. Though in some sense, Budai is no stranger to taking on different forms. From semi-legendary monk to eschatological mythological figure to popular deity, his identity has always been fluid, shaped by the needs and imaginations of the communities that embrace him. And speaking of mistaken identities, over on Nebula, I've just released a new episode in my ongoing series, Sacred Spaces, where
Okay, that's the end of that video. Yes, he's got, okay, we will leave the like on his video. I'll leave a comment on this video letting them know that I reacted to them on stream. Alright.